true horror story behind the creation of a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. A nightmare born of reality. In the realm of horror cinema, few films have left as indelible a mark as A Nightmare on Elm Street. The story of Freddy Krueger, a supernatural killer who preys on his victims in their dreams, has terrified audiences for decades. But what many fans of the film may not realize is that this chilling tale was inspired by a series of real-life events that are as unsettling as the fictional story itself. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, a mysterious phenomenon began to claim the lives of young Southeast Asian men who had fled war and genocide to resettle in the United States. These men, seemingly healthy and in their prime, died suddenly in their sleep after reporting vivid and terrifying nightmares. This tragic and unexplained occurrence, later classified as sudden unexplained nocturnal death syndrome, SUNDS, baffled medical experts and struck fear into refugee communities. For filmmaker Wes Craven, these haunting real-life accounts became the foundation for one of Hollywood's most iconic horror films. Yet behind the fictional terror of Freddy Krueger lies a true story of cultural trauma, spiritual beliefs, and a baffling medical mystery that continues to intrigue and disturb to this day. The refugee crisis, a community in trauma. The Hmong people, an ethnic minority from the mountainous regions of Laos, Vietnam, and Thailand, faced unimaginable hardship during and after the Vietnam War. Their story is one of bravery, betrayal, and survival. But it is also a tale of profound trauma that continues to affect their community decades later. The Hmong during the Vietnam War. In the 1960s, as the Vietnam War spilled into Laos, the United States covertly recruited the Hmong to fight against communist forces in what became known as the Secret War. The Hmong were critical allies for the CIA, providing intelligence, rescuing downed American pilots, and engaging in guerrilla warfare against the Pathet Lao and North Vietnamese forces. Over 30,000 Hmong men served as soldiers, with casualty rates 10 times higher than those of American troops. Civilians were not spared either. Villages were bombed or burned, and crops and livestock were destroyed. By 1975, when the U.S. withdrew from Southeast Asia and communist forces took control of Laos, the Hmong were left vulnerable. The new regime labeled them enemies of the state due to their alliance with the Americans. Thousands of Hmong were hunted down, imprisoned in labor camps, or killed. Villages were sprayed with chemical weapons or bombed with napalm. The refugee flight. Faced with persecution, famine, and death, many Hmong fled their homeland. Between 1975 and 1997, approximately 138,000 Hmong made perilous journeys to refugee camps in Thailand. These treks were fraught with danger, disease, starvation, exposure to harsh conditions, and drowning while crossing the Mekong River claimed countless lives. It is estimated that over 50,000 Hmong civilians died during this period of displacement. The refugee camps in Thailand offered little reprieve. Overcrowded and lacking basic amenities like electricity and sanitation, these camps became temporary homes for tens of thousands of displaced Hmong. Despite international aid efforts from organizations like the UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, conditions remained dire. Many refugees were reluctant to leave Asia due to fears of cultural dislocation or family separation. Resettlement in the United States. Eventually, many Hmong refugees resettled in countries like the United States. By 2000, over 200,000 Hmong had immigrated to America, with large communities forming in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and California. However, resettlement brought its own challenges. The Hmong faced cultural isolation due to language barriers and unfamiliarity with Western customs. Many struggled with poverty and unemployment while trying to adapt to a new way of life. For those who had endured war and displacement, psychological scars ran deep. Studies show that a significant proportion of Hmong refugees suffer from mental health disorders such as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and anxiety. These conditions are often exacerbated by acculturation stress, navigating a foreign culture while trying to preserve traditional values, and a lack of access to mental health services due to stigma and cultural differences. The trauma experienced by the Hmong during their displacement has had long-lasting effects on their community. Elders carry memories of war atrocities, watching loved ones die or fleeing burning villages, while younger generations grapple with identity conflicts as they navigate between traditional Hmong culture and American society. This intergenerational trauma is compounded by unique cultural beliefs that frame mental health issues as spiritual problems rather than medical conditions. The plight of the Hmong refugees is a powerful reminder of how war can devastate not only individuals, but entire communities. Their resilience in the face of immense suffering is a testament to their strength as a people, but also highlights the urgent need for culturally sensitive support systems to address their ongoing struggles with trauma and displacement. The nightmare deaths begin in the late 1970s and early 1980s. A chilling phenomenon began to emerge among Southeast Asian refugees in the United States. Healthy young men, predominantly from the Hmong community, were inexplicably dying in their sleep. These deaths, later termed sudden unexplained nocturnal death syndrome, SUNDS, baffled medical experts and terrified refugee communities. What made these deaths particularly eerie was their suddenness, and the victims shared experiences of vivid nightmares before succumbing. The first recorded cases of SUNDS among Southeast Asian refugees occurred in 1977. By 1981, the syndrome had reached its peak, with 26 deaths reported that year alone. Victims were almost always young men, averaging 33 years old, who appeared healthy and had no prior medical conditions. 98% of these deaths occurred between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. during sleep. Witness accounts describe victims crying out or showing signs of distress before dying. Some were observed gasping for air, convulsing, or clutching at their chests moments before death. In most cases, by the time emergency responders arrived, the victims' hearts were either fibrillating wildly or had already stopped beating. Medical investigations, the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, began investigating SUNDS in 1981 after noticing a pattern among Southeast Asian refugees from Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia. Autopsies revealed no clear cause of death. No heart disease, trauma, or toxins were detected. However, some studies found anomalies in the victims' cardiac conduction systems, suggesting that irregular heart rhythms, ventricular fibrillation, might be responsible. One theory proposed that genetic predispositions, such as Brugada syndrome, a condition causing irregular heartbeats, might explain these deaths. This theory gained traction because Brugada syndrome is more prevalent among Southeast Asians and is often triggered during sleep. Other hypotheses included stress-induced cardiac failure due to the immense trauma and dislocation experienced by refugees. Cultural beliefs. For many Hmong refugees, these deaths were not merely medical mysteries but spiritual crises. According to Hmong folklore, a malevolent spirit called Dabsog, or nightmare spirit, was believed to attack individuals who failed to honor their ancestors or perform proper rituals. The spirit was said to sit on the victim's chest during sleep, suffocating them and preventing them from waking up. This belief mirrored similar cultural explanations across Southeast Asia. In the Philippines, it is called Bangangat, meaning to rise and moan. In Thailand, it is known as Lai Tai, or death in sleep. In Japan, it is referred to as Pakuri, meaning sudden death. Hmong men sometimes resorted to wearing women's clothing to confuse the spirit or sought shamans to perform protective rituals. However, many refugees lacked access to traditional healers after resettling in America. A decline in deaths. By the mid-1980s, the incidence of SUNDS began to decline sharply among Southeast Asian refugees in the United States. Researchers speculated that improved living conditions, better diets, and reduced stress levels contributed to this decline. However, cases continued to occur in refugee camps in Thailand and other parts of Southeast Asia. Legacy. The mysterious deaths associated with SUNDS remain an unsettling chapter in medical history. While some progress has been made in understanding potential genetic and cardiac causes, no single explanation fully accounts for these sudden deaths. For the Hmong community and other Southeast Asian groups affected by SUNDS, these events are a haunting reminder of the intersection between cultural beliefs and unexplained medical phenomena. The tragic accounts of young men dying after vivid nightmares would later inspire Wes Craven's creation of A Nightmare on Elm Street. Yet for those who lived through this terrifying period, SUNDS was far more than a fictional horror story. It was a grim reality that claimed lives without warning. Medical investigations, a mystery without answers. Alarmed by these unexplained deaths, the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, launched an investigation. Researchers proposed several theories. Stress and trauma. Many victims had recently experienced extreme psychological stress due to war, displacement, and cultural dislocation. Genetic predisposition. Some speculated that SUNDS might be linked to Brugada syndrome, a genetic heart condition more common among Southeast Asians. Sleep paralysis. Others suggested that sleep paralysis, a condition where individuals feel unable to move while waking or falling asleep, might play a role. Despite these theories, no definitive explanation emerged. The deaths remained a medical enigma. Cardiac abnormalities and arrhythmias. One of the most prominent medical theories links SUNDS to cardiac abnormalities, particularly ventricular fibrillation, a chaotic heart rhythm that can lead to sudden cardiac arrest. Post-mortem studies have frequently identified anomalies in the cardiac conduction system, CCS, which regulates the electrical impulses controlling heartbeat. For instance, a study in central China found that 82.9% of SUNDS victims displayed minor histological anomalies in their CCS, including fatty infiltration, fibrosis, and punctate hemorrhages. These abnormalities could predispose individuals to fatal arrhythmias during sleep. Brugada syndrome, a genetic heart condition more prevalent in Southeast Asians, has been strongly associated with SUNDS. This syndrome disrupts the heart's electrical system and is often triggered during rest or sleep due to vagal dominance, increased parasympathetic activity. These findings suggest that underlying cardiac vulnerabilities may act as a substrate for sudden death when combined with specific triggers, sleep disorders, and respiratory factors. Another area of focus has been the role of sleep disorders in SUNDS. Research has highlighted several sleep-related factors that may contribute to these deaths. Sleep apnea, high upper airway resistance and hypoventilation during REM, rapid eye movement. Sleep can lead to hypoxemia, low oxygen levels, potentially triggering fatal arrhythmias in predisposed individuals. Sleep paralysis and nightmares. Many victims reported terrifying experiences of being unable to move or breathe during sleep, phenomena often linked to sleep paralysis. This condition occurs when wakefulness intrudes on REM sleep, leaving individuals conscious but paralyzed. These episodes could exacerbate stress and cardiac strain. In Hmong communities specifically, cultural interpretations of these experiences, such as attacks by the spirit Dabsog, may amplify psychological stress, further increasing vulnerability to SUNDS. Stress and psychosocial factors. The refugee experience itself may play a critical role in SUNDS cases. Many victims were Hmong men who had fled war and genocide in Laos, enduring immense psychological trauma and cultural dislocation. Chronic stress from displacement, poverty, and cultural isolation may have heightened their risk of cardiovascular events. Stress is known to influence autonomic nervous system activity, potentially triggering arrhythmias in susceptible individuals. Cultural beliefs about nocturnal spirits, Dabsog, attacking during sleep may have compounded the stress. Fear of these attacks could lead to insomnia or fragmented sleep patterns, further straining the heart. Epidemiological observations. Epidemiological studies have provided additional insights into SUNDS. Victims are predominantly young males aged 20 to 40 years, with peak incidences occurring between midnight and 6 a.m. Autopsies often reveal pulmonary edema, fluid accumulation in the lungs, in SUNDS victims at significantly higher rates than non-SUNDS cases. This finding suggests acute cardiopulmonary failure as a possible mechanism of death. The phenomenon is not isolated to one region. Similar syndromes exist globally under different names. Bangdungit in the Philippines, Lai Tai in Thailand, and Pakuri in Japan. Unresolved questions. Despite these findings, SUNDS remains a medical enigma. Key questions include: why do these deaths occur almost exclusively during sleep? What specific triggers, such as diet, environmental factors, or infections, might precipitate fatal events? How do cultural and psychological factors interact with biological vulnerabilities? To address these gaps, researchers have called for more comprehensive studies combining genetic testing, molecular autopsies, and ethnographic analysis to uncover the full spectrum of causes behind SUNDS. The mystery of SUNDS lies at the intersection of biology, culture, and psychology. While cardiac abnormalities like Brugada syndrome provide a plausible explanation for many cases, other factors such as stress-induced autonomic dysfunction and sleep disorders likely play significant roles. For affected communities like the Hmong refugees, understanding this syndrome is not just a scientific challenge, but also a deeply personal quest to make sense of a tragedy that has claimed so many lives without warning. Further research is essential to unravel this complex phenomenon and prevent future deaths. Cultural beliefs. The spirit world strikes back. The mysterious deaths attributed to sudden unexplained nocturnal death syndrome, SUNDS, among Southeast Asian refugees, particularly the Hmong people, cannot be fully understood without examining their cultural and spiritual beliefs. For the Hmong and other Southeast Asian communities, these deaths are not merely medical phenomena, but deeply intertwined with folklore and spiritual traditions. The belief in malevolent spirits, ancestral obligations, and the delicate balance between the physical and spiritual worlds plays a central role in how these events are perceived. The Hmong perspective, malevolent spirits and ancestral wrath. In Hmong animist traditions, the world is seen as a coexistence of physical and spiritual realms. Spirits Dab influence every aspect of life, from health and prosperity to misfortune and death. Among these spirits is Dab Sog, a nocturnal entity believed to attack individuals during sleep. Known as the pressing spirit, Dab Sog is said to sit on the chest of its victims, suffocating them and inducing fatal nightmares. This phenomenon aligns closely with what Western medicine describes as sleep paralysis. The Hmong believe that such attacks occur when individuals fail to honor their ancestors or neglect important rituals. For example, if proper sacrifices are not made to appease ancestral spirits, protection may be withdrawn, leaving individuals vulnerable to malevolent forces. Displacement caused by war and resettlement disrupted many traditional practices, making it difficult for Hmong refugees to maintain their spiritual obligations. This cultural dislocation heightened fears of spiritual attacks. Victims of Dab Sog often reported vivid nightmares involving a sinister presence before their deaths. These experiences reinforced the belief that the spirit world was directly responsible for the fatalities. Regional parallels. Similar beliefs across Southeast Asia. The concept of nocturnal spirit attacks is not unique to the Hmong, but resonates across Southeast Asia under different names. Philippines. Known as Bangangat, this phenomenon is attributed to a spirit or creature called Batabat, which sits on the victim's chest during sleep, causing suffocation. Some Filipinos believe that eating a heavy meal before bed makes one more susceptible to such attacks. Thailand. In Thai folklore, sudden nocturnal deaths are often blamed on a widow ghost, Phai Mai Mai, who preys on young men during sleep. China. The term Bei Guaya translates to crushed by a ghost, describing similar experiences of chest pressure and paralysis during sleep. Vietnam. Sleep paralysis is referred to as Mata, meaning held down by a ghost. These shared beliefs highlight a cultural framework in which unexplained deaths are attributed to spiritual causes rather than physical ones. Shamanic practices. Protection from spiritual attacks. In traditional Hmong culture, shamans play a vital role in mediating between the physical and spiritual worlds. They perform rituals to diagnose spiritual disturbances and provide protection against malevolent forces. Shamans may use offerings, chants, or symbolic objects to ward off spirits like dabsog. In some cases, men would disguise themselves by wearing women's clothing while sleeping, believing this could confuse the spirit and prevent an attack. However, for many Hmong refugees resettled in the United States during the 1970s and 1980s, access to shamans was limited. Scattered across different cities, without established community networks or traditional healers, many felt spiritually unprotected. This lack of access compounded their fears and may have contributed psychologically to their vulnerability. A psychological dimension. Fear as a self-fulfilling prophecy. The belief in spirits like dabsog may have had profound psychological effects on victims. Fear of an attack could trigger stress responses that exacerbate underlying cardiac vulnerabilities. Stress-induced autonomic dysfunction and imbalance in the nervous system can lead to arrhythmias or sudden cardiac arrest, particularly during sleep. Sleep paralysis episodes, common among individuals experiencing high stress, may have been interpreted as spiritual attacks, reinforcing fear and creating a vicious cycle. Some researchers suggest that these cultural beliefs acted as nocebos, the opposite of placebos, where fear itself contributed to fatal outcomes. In this view, belief in spirits like dabsog became a psychological trigger for physiological events leading to death. The Hmong experience with SUNDS illustrates how cultural beliefs shape perceptions of unexplained phenomena. For the Hmong people, these deaths were not random. They were deeply tied to disruptions in spiritual practices caused by war and displacement. The belief in malevolent spirits like dabsog provided an explanation that aligned with their worldview, but also amplified fear and stress. While medical science continues to explore genetic predispositions and cardiac anomalies linked to SUNDS, the cultural context remains essential for understanding its impact on affected communities. The interplay between belief systems and physiological responses highlights how deeply intertwined culture and health can be, where the spirit world truly seems to strike back. Wes Craven's inspiration. Wes Craven's inspiration for A Nightmare on Elm Street came from a chilling real-life story he read in the Los Angeles Times during the early 1980s. The article detailed the mysterious and tragic deaths of Southeast Asian refugees, particularly young Hmong men, who had fled war and genocide to resettle in the United States. These men were reportedly dying in their sleep after experiencing vivid and terrifying nightmares. This phenomenon, later classified as sudden unexplained nocturnal death syndrome, SUNDS, became the foundation for Craven's iconic horror concept. One specific account that deeply resonated with Craven involved a Cambodian family who had escaped the horrors of the killing fields. Their young son began suffering from disturbing nightmares and told his parents that he feared something was chasing him in his dreams. Terrified, he stayed awake for days, refusing to sleep. Eventually, exhaustion overcame him and he fell asleep. That night, his parents heard him screaming, but found him dead by the time they reached him. He had died mid-nightmare, with no apparent physical cause. This haunting story sparked Craven's imagination and became the central premise of A Nightmare on Elm Street. What if someone could die as a direct result of their dreams? Craven also drew from broader reports of SUNDS among Hmong refugees, which had been widely covered in the media at the time. Between 1977 and 1981, over 100 cases of sudden nocturnal deaths were reported among Southeast Asian men in America. The victims were typically healthy young men who died inexplicably during sleep, often after describing intense fears or nightmares. Medical investigations yielded no definitive answers, though theories range from genetic heart conditions like Brugada syndrome to stress-induced cardiac failure exacerbated by cultural beliefs about malevolent spirits. Craven took these real-world tragedies and reimagined them through a supernatural lens. He asked himself, what if the dreams themselves were lethal? What if a common nightmare tied these victims together? This line of thought led to the creation of Freddy Krueger, a malevolent figure who invades dreams to kill his victims. turning their worst fears into fatal reality. The combination of these real-life events and Craven's creative genius gave rise to one of horror cinema's most enduring franchises. Freddy Krueger became a symbol of primal fear, the vulnerability we all share when we close our eyes to sleep. Legacy. Fact meets fiction. The story of A Nightmare on Elm Street is more than just a fictional horror tale. It is a chilling reflection of real-life events that blurred the line between fact and fiction. Wes Craven's creation of Freddy Krueger, the dream-invading villain who kills his victims in their sleep, was directly inspired by the mysterious deaths of Southeast Asian refugees. These deaths, later classified as sudden unexplained nocturnal death syndrome, SUNDS, left a lasting impact on both medical science and cultural history. The legacy of these events continues to resonate, not only in the horror genre, but also in the communities affected by this tragic phenomenon. The horror film legacy. When A Nightmare on Elm Street debuted in 1984, it became an instant classic. Freddy Krueger, with his burned face, razor-sharp glove, and ability to kill through dreams, tapped into primal fears about vulnerability during sleep. The film's central premise, that nightmares could be fatal, was terrifying because it was rooted in real-world events. Craven's genius lay in taking the mystery and terror of SUNDS and transforming it into a supernatural narrative. He combined elements of folklore, like the Hmong belief in Dabsog or oppressing spirit, with universal fears about death and sleep to create a villain who transcended cultural boundaries. Freddy Krueger became a symbol of anxiety, trauma, and the unknown, a figure who could haunt anyone, anywhere. The film's success spawned a franchise that included multiple sequels, crossovers, Freddy vs. Jason, and even a 2010 remake. Over time, Freddy Krueger evolved into one of Hollywood's most iconic horror villains, cementing his place in pop culture history. The medical mystery endures. While A Nightmare on Elm Street brought the phenomenon of SUNDS to mainstream attention, the real-life mystery remains unsolved. Despite decades of research, no single explanation fully accounts for the sudden deaths of young Southeast Asian men during sleep. Theories range from genetic predispositions, like Brugada syndrome, to stress-induced cardiac failure and cultural factors like fear of malevolent spirits. The intersection of culture and medicine has been a key focus for researchers. Cultural beliefs. For communities like the Hmong, spiritual explanations such as attacks by Dabsog remain deeply ingrained. These beliefs highlight how cultural frameworks shape responses to unexplained phenomena. Psychological stress. The trauma of war, displacement, and resettlement likely played a role in exacerbating stress levels among refugees, potentially triggering fatal cardiac events. Genetic factors. Advances in genetic research have linked SUNDS to conditions like Brugada syndrome, which disrupts heart rhythms during rest or sleep. Despite these insights, SUNDS remains an enigmatic condition with no definitive cause or cure. Impact on refugee communities. For the Hmong and other Southeast Asian refugees affected by SUNDS, these deaths were more than medical anomalies. They were profound tragedies that compounded the trauma of war and displacement. The sudden loss of young men left families devastated and communities searching for answers. In many ways, these deaths became symbolic of the broader struggles faced by refugee populations. Cultural dislocation. Many victims died in unfamiliar environments far from their ancestral lands and spiritual traditions. This disconnection from cultural practices may have heightened feelings of vulnerability. Intergenerational trauma. The psychological scars left by SUNDS continue to affect younger generations within these communities. Stories of unexplained deaths are passed down as cautionary tales, reinforcing cultural fears about spirits and sleep. Efforts to address these issues have included community outreach programs to provide mental health support and culturally sensitive healthcare services for Southeast Asian refugees. Fact meets fiction, a lasting legacy. The blending of fact and fiction in A Nightmare on Elm Street has had a profound impact on how audiences perceive both horror films and real-life mysteries. 1. Raising awareness. By drawing inspiration from SUNDS, Wes Craven brought attention to an obscure medical phenomenon that might otherwise have remained unknown outside academic circles. 2. Cultural reflection. The film serves as a lens through which audiences can explore themes of trauma, displacement, and fear, issues that resonate far beyond the horror genre. 3. Universal fears. Freddy Krueger embodies universal anxieties about sleep and vulnerability, making him a timeless figure in popular culture. For those familiar with the true story behind A Nightmare on Elm Street, the film takes on an added layer of meaning. It is not just a work of fiction, but also a haunting reminder that some nightmares are rooted in reality. The legacy of A Nightmare on Elm Street is twofold. It stands as one of Hollywood's most enduring horror franchises, while also serving as a fictionalized account of real-world tragedies. The mysterious deaths that inspired Freddy Krueger remain unsolved, but continue to provoke questions about the interplay between culture, medicine, and fear. For audiences worldwide, Freddy is a monster born from imagination. But for those who lived through the nightmare deaths that inspired him, his story is all too real. In this way, fact meets fiction in one of cinema's most unsettling legacies. A tale where reality proves just as terrifying as anything dreamed up on screen. The legacy of A Nightmare on Elm Street is a complex tapestry of cultural, medical, and cinematic significance, blending real-life tragedy with fictional horror. Wes Craven's creation of Freddy Krueger, a dream-invading killer, was directly inspired by the mysterious deaths of Southeast Asian refugees, a phenomenon that remains both a medical enigma and a cultural cautionary tale. This intersection of fact and fiction has left an indelible mark on popular culture, the horror genre, and the communities affected by these events. Cinematic impact. When A Nightmare on Elm Street debuted in 1984, it revolutionized the horror genre. Freddy Krueger, with his burned face, razor-sharp glove, and ability to kill through dreams, became one of the most iconic villains in film history. The movie's central premise, that dreams could be fatal, tapped into universal fears about vulnerability during sleep, making it both terrifying and relatable. The film's success spawned a franchise that included 9 films, including sequels, crossovers like Freddy vs. Jason, and a 2010 remake. A television series, Freddy's Nightmares, 1988 to 1990, which expanded the lore. Countless references in pop culture, from parodies to merchandise. Freddy Krueger became more than just a movie character. He became a symbol of fear itself. His ability to invade dreams blurred the line between reality and fiction, ensuring his place as one of Hollywood's most enduring horror icons. Raising awareness of SUNDS. While Freddy Krueger is fictional, his origins are rooted in real-life events. The mysterious deaths of young Southeast Asian men due to sudden unexplained nocturnal death syndrome, SUNDS, were widely reported in the late 1970s and early 1980s, but largely confined to medical and refugee communities. Wes Craven's decision to base his film on these accounts brought this obscure phenomenon into mainstream awareness. Though SUNDS remains poorly understood, its association with the film has sparked interest in its medical and cultural dimensions. Medical research. SUNDS has been linked to conditions like Brugada syndrome, a genetic heart disorder, and stress-related cardiac failure. However, no single explanation fully accounts for these sudden deaths. Cultural context. The Hmong belief in malevolent spirits like Dabsog, the pressing spirit, highlights how cultural frameworks shape perceptions of unexplained phenomena. The film indirectly introduced audiences to these beliefs, fostering curiosity about their origins. By weaving real-life mystery into cinematic horror, A Nightmare on Elm Street created a bridge between entertainment and education, albeit unintentionally. Impact on refugee communities. For the Hmong and other Southeast Asian communities affected by SUNDS, the legacy is deeply personal. These deaths were not just medical anomalies, but profound tragedies that compounded the trauma of war and displacement. Families were left searching for answers, while grappling with the loss of young men who had survived unimaginable hardships, only to die inexplicably in their sleep. The cultural dislocation experienced by refugees played a significant role in how these deaths were interpreted. Spiritual vulnerability. Many victims died far from their ancestral lands and spiritual traditions, leaving them unprotected against malevolent forces in their belief systems. Intergenerational trauma. Stories of SUNDS have been passed down as cautionary tales within refugee families, reinforcing fears about sleep and spiritual attacks. For these communities, the connection between their real-life tragedies and a Hollywood horror film is bittersweet. While the film immortalized their experiences in an abstract way, it also distanced those experiences from their cultural context. A timeless exploration of fear. At its core, A Nightmare on Elm Street explores universal themes of fear, trauma, and vulnerability, issues that transcend culture and time. Fear of vulnerability. Sleep is when we are most defenseless. By turning dreams into a battleground, the film taps into primal anxieties shared by all humans. Trauma made manifest. Freddy Krueger represents more than just a monster. He symbolizes unresolved fears that haunt us even when we try to escape them. Cultural universality. While inspired by specific events among Southeast Asian refugees, the film resonates globally because it draws from archetypal fears found in folklore worldwide, such as sleep paralysis demons or spirits that attack during rest. This timeless quality ensures that Freddy Krueger remains relevant decades after his creation. The legacy of A Nightmare on Elm Street is twofold. It stands as one of Hollywood's most successful horror franchises, while also serving as an eerie reflection of real-world tragedies. The mysterious deaths that inspired Wes Craven remain unsolved, but continue to provoke questions about the interplay between culture, medicine, and fear. For audiences worldwide, Freddy Krueger is a fictional monster who embodies our darkest nightmares. For those who lived through the nightmare deaths that inspired him, however, his story is rooted in painful reality, a reminder that sometimes truth is scarier than fiction. In this way, A Nightmare on Elm Street transcends its genre to become both entertainment and a haunting exploration of human fragility. Finally, the story behind A Nightmare on Elm Street is more than just Hollywood fiction. It is a haunting tale rooted in real-life tragedy. The mysterious deaths that inspired Freddy Krueger remind us that sometimes reality can be far scarier than anything imagined on screen. As we delve into stories like these, we are forced to confront not only our fears, but also the complex interplay between culture, trauma, and unexplained phenomena. And that's the end of this video. If you enjoyed this true horror story behind the creation of A Nightmare on Elm Street movie, then do subscribe to Horror Vault to watch our upcoming videos. I will see you in the next video.